Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Massimiliano. Since 2001, Massimiliano has promoted the desegregation of the Neapolitan language and the enfranchisement of its speakers. Amongst his initiatives is a bill to facilitate the inclusion of the Neapolitan language within the minority languages recognized by the Italian state. He has also worked on the publication of a magazine, Neapolitan language and culture courses at a secondary school in Naples and at the University of Glasgow, the first two novels written entirely in Neapolitan, and a play. I'm so happy to have you here today on the podcast, Massimiliano. How are you?
Well, and thank you so much. As I was telling you just a couple of minutes ago, I'm deeply honored and grateful for having me and the plight of the speakers from Neapolitan.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I know we're going to be sharing a lot of really good information over the course of this conversation. So let's get into it. I'd like to ask the first question every episode. What is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
So my first language was Neapolitan. I spoke Neapolitan all the way to my first day of primary in nursery. So that was it. The Italian was playing in the background, so that we had these really bulky TVs, and there's a couple of programs in the morning. So I was aware of the existence of the Italian language. I'm from a historical district in Naples called Rione Sanità, and densely populated, so roughly 60,000 people live in that area. And in the early 70s, it was a perfectly ghettoized, in a sense, linguistic area. So you would not meet a single person who spoke a single word of Italian, because we were, for that very same reason, that we were ghettoized. So let's say maybe I was 4 years old when I then when I went to nursery. And then at that point, I was made fully aware of the other language that I was supposed to speak. And then at that point, you just become, just navigating the enforced bilingualism, if you like. Then I think I was exposed to English first time maybe in middle school. And then eventually I went to university. I studied, obviously, English language and literature, as well as Spanish. So my degree was in these two languages. And that was it. And that's me. And I suppose I should also now mention the fact that, having lived here in Scotland, I should be also a speaker to a certain extent, of Scots. We do teach it, and we do speak it, even though on a really minimal scale. So I suppose there's 5 languages floating around my synapses.
I think you set the tone for this conversation by mentioning that Neapolitan is the language, and I'm going to say Neapolitan, and you corrected me. You were kind enough to correct me earlier from saying Napolitano to Napolitano, and I deeply appreciate that. But I think you set the tone in understanding how Neapolitan language is in dynamic with the Italian language. And I think, as someone who's not Italian and not Neapolitan and not in Europe, understanding that dynamic is really important, because it's easy, I think, for people to look at Italy as monolithic, monolingual Italian speakers. So for you to make that distinction and for this to be your work to champion the Neapolitan language is so important. So I'd love to know, in your opinion, in your thought, how you see things, in your view, what makes Neapolitan language unique?
Sure. I become more and more convinced of the fact that language is the place you occupy in your existence and in the universe, if you like. And so, as the only reason why I would say Neapolitan is unique is because it originated in a place that we describe as Naples, and it is unique in that it has suffered a lot of the brunt of what we call Western civilization. So it was colonized in the early 9th century before Christ, and my idea is that people in that area were not warrior people, therefore fully exposed to the wrath of ancient Greek at that time, and therefore they took full advantage of this territory where people were just fully willing to embrace other cultures at their own expense, naturally. I think it is unique because at the same time, there's this linguistic sedimentation also allows a unique historical insight. Now decided that, since the Enlightenment, history is not as important for a reason, obviously, for self-serving reasons. But I think if we look in the current state of Neapolitan, then we delved even more into its history, then we would realize a lot more of the reasons behind the problems we're facing today, mainly denial. And that is the reason behind the pursuit of the obliteration of history. Is if I don't look at history, I don't look at things that I have done, and that allows me, entitles me to make the same mistakes over and over again, namely war, oppression, and so forth.
Okay. So when you're saying denial, who's denying what?
Sure. I think it's one of the essential paradigms of Western civilization. If I really want to pursue the full achievement of my potential, I think, when we talk about Nietzschean will to power, this was already present in the cognitive framework, like early Western civilization. You just go for it. Don't care by the people I'm annihilating. There's some dark aim, and then I can come up with some ideas such as the fatherland and the country, and even justice. Even just at one point, during the French Revolution, allowed Western civilization to disguise oppression through the face of social justice and equality and liberty. I think this fixation, this necessity, this inherent necessity of casting history and memory to one side, in order for you to then have one half of your conscious clear.
Right.
What, even when we talk about doublethink, again, that obviously has become a lot more apparent during the past centuries or so. But again, that was, as far as I'm concerned, that was already part of those cognitive tricks that we used for the early Western civilization.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack.
I realize that. Sorry,
there's a lot to unpack. No,
it's very good at narrowing things down. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's that's what this is for. We're gonna do our best to unpack what we can. But I want to go back to, just talking about the shame of that one would feel or one has felt in speaking Neapolitan. And talk to me a bit about what that's like, or what that has been like for you, and what your first encounter with it was.
Sure, yeah. To this day, it's been, I think it's both 50 years since I first went to nursery, if you like, and it's still, the older I get, the more traumatic and the more painful it gets, because the memory becomes more and more vivid. Now, naturally, when you're 4, yourself is hardly formed. The trouble I remember vividly was with how this stigma affected my perception of my loved ones. So if I'm at home and I'm 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and having just an average working class happy childhood, and if I look at my mom and my dad and my cousins and my siblings, and this is all my entire universe. And
right.
My heroes, and to a certain extent, as it happens in working class families, kind of a menace as well. You're just like gods. So you're on Mount Olympus, and then suddenly you go to school, and somebody says, "Parla bene," not because you've just swore or because it's just an inappropriate language, just because the fact that being, your entire being, there's something inherently wrong with it. There's something inherently evil. What can't a 4-year-old really understand? So at that point, what really pained me was that everybody, all my heroes back at home, suddenly they just collapsed. They just collapsed. And I thought, well, I just kind of, what we're really, then eventually you realize the dynamics, and you see the GP coming home and everybody just panicking and sweating, or just sweating bullets as your skull. The panic of just because somebody who speaks Italian has, crossed the threshold, and therefore there's this extraterrestrial almost presence. And at that point you think, well, how can I form? Well, if you want to put it in a selfish way, what's going to happen to my ego then? Because obviously you base it on your parents whom you worship in a way, yeah, and rightly so, because they provide you with affection, everything you need.
Yeah.
And even to this day, I think, forget my ego, I couldn't care less. But what I'm doing, what is the priority for me is to restore the dignity of uh, my community.
Hmm.
Because unless I do that, so I'm stuck. So again, in selfish terms, my dignity, my self-worth is really stuck with the rest of my community. So unless I fix them, I cannot fix myself.
Hmm. Yeah. When you said parla bene,
Hmm.
I won't say for the first time, but it strikes me because, and this is your story, but I'm just going to tell this really quick anecdote.
So,
I think I see parallels with the Black community here in the United States and the way that we speak at home in our, as people call it, African American vernacular English. And we're often told, or we have been told historically, that's not English. You're not speaking right. Speak better. That's improper. And it's something I think in our consciousness as a community, we're realizing it now. But
mhm. Yeah.
nobody knew that in the 80s when I was growing up. Nobody was saying like it's okay to speak what you speak. The reason why I'm bringing that up also is because I do know that there was a very clear difference. We were exposed to that difference. And we had, even in our own homes at that time, we had people telling us, this is not the way that you speak in public. This is
Mhm.
not the way that you speak outside. So, my
Mhm.
question to you is, did you have any of that in your Neapolitan speaking household where maybe older siblings or cousins or kind of prepped you or warned you that, wait, when you go to school, they're going to want you to speak Italian?
No, really. No, that would have been, I think, advantageous at least because you would have begun to question it. But instead, the whole process is perfectly internalized. Now, naturally, I was born in the early 70s, but during the fascist era, again, that reinforcement was very much physical. Yeah,
Mm,
corporal punishment. When I was in school, corporal punishment was still very much common practice, unless your parents expressly opted out, which was the case, like for me, at least, fortunately.
thank
And
goodness.
so that was during the fascist era. It was when, say, working class people were first invited to attend school, even though it was a few hours a day. But when you went there, if you if you stepped out of line, you'd be slapped,
Mm,
smacked.
hmm.
So then that continued, and therefore that became some sort of subliminal, preemptive warning for people. So really, nobody told you speak well. That is one of my greatest fortune in that I was never told. My parents never told me. I already knew. So we went out. We left as long as we were within our district, our ghetto. Everything was good. We crossed the border and we ventured into the low middle class areas, and everybody just shrunk. Everybody just shrunk and shriveled, and you knew because you could see your parents suddenly going from confident, swagger and all the rest to timid, um,
Mm,
and so, but luckily that was the greatest gift I think that my parents left me was that they knew it was wrong. They knew that the whole, and most people, everyone in Naples, I mean, if you really have a pro conversation, everybody knows that it's wrong. So my parents, actually, they used the expression, when I stepped out of line in terms of speaking Neapolitan improperly,
mhm,
so they told me, parla buona, which was
mm, mhm,
speak well Neapolitan, speak Neapolitan properly.
mhm.
Then you might then, so they did what they could in terms of just providing me with the greatest sense of self-worth that was really achievable at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I love that your parents had that ability
Hmm.
to reinforce that in you. And even if you witnessed them shrinking or you witnessed their change
Hmm.
in themselves, they probably didn't realize that you realized it because parents think that kids are not paying attention, but
Yeah, yeah,
kids are always paying attention, right? So,
absolutely.
but this
Right.
is, having that experience, and I'm sorry that you experienced that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's fueled where you are now and it's
Mm-hmm.
fueled your life's work. So tell me a bit more about, as we're looking at the wider Italian context, the Italian state as a country, how is Neapolitan fit into that? And I guess
Mm-hmm.
let's talk a bit about the stratification of the
Mm-hmm.
language and the culture of Naples and Neapolitan people as it relates to the larger context of the country.
Sure. Well, this goes also to the beginning of my work as a language activist and writer. Naturally, Italy as a nation as a result of liberal movement, so that there was this great ability to convey the idea of a project based on justice whilst at the same time perpetrating sheer evil. So when let's forget the first 50 or odd years, but after, even if you just look at the Constitution, the Italian Constitution, in one of his articles, I always forget whether it's the second or third one, there's a mention of every Italian citizen to have the right to express their persona, irrespective of their religion, gender. And there is also a mention of languages. But then, obviously, there is a list of the languages that are admitted. So the Italian constitution, which the Italians see as a masterpiece of liberalism, and that in reality is just a huge mess. So they say, okay, you have the right to express your persona, irrespective of the language you speak. But then we're going to tell you the languages that are admitted within this faculty. So if you look at, naturally, all they included was just a number of the minority languages, historical minority languages. So that was after the war. And therefore, Neapolitan, the idea of Neapolitan dialect being, or even the language, means the means of communication, and this romanticized, the bon savage and an atavistic, naturally born criminal, that just went on. And therefore, if you had just merely mentioned the idea of Neapolitan being a language, people would have just laughed at you and reprimanded you for talking nonsense. Then they had another chance, and they still blew it, because in 1999, and this is when I first had some sort of epiphany about the need to change things around. So in 1999, it wasn't necessarily, it was the EU. They asked each country to compile a list of their minority languages, because also the idea was to celebrate the 2001 European Year of Languages. And that's when I think it was 1999 or year 2000 when I first read about it. So they promulgated the new law. So they added on new minority languages to the previous list from the post-war era. And again, Neapolitan wasn't there. So they added Sardinian, they added Friulan.
Wow.
But obviously, they can always come up with a good excuse. So when I first began the petition to propose a bill which would have facilitated the inclusion of Naples, I was even chatting with some of the senators, and they had taken part in the previous law, and they were saying, well, we just looked at all the languages that were Neo-Latin languages, and the languages that have different roots from Latin. What does that even have to do with anything? We're talking about safeguarding languages, but that just goes back to the fact that our political class has always been essentially fully and proudly detached from what they considered as plebeian scum, because that is the truth of the matter, is that in 2026, we're still the dichotomy-based left and right Italian political class is still the same guys. Well, basically, just these guys have been enslaved for 2,000 years. We can be next, and therefore, you can just keep them content by telling them that Naples is the most beautiful city in the world, and the food is nice, and songs are beautiful, but when we talk about instilling self-worth, which would then lead, because this is what they see as the danger, if you instill self-worth. And that was also part, because when I did the petition and then eventually found the two MPs who would to present the bill, they asked me to write the presentation of the bill. And so I included the aspect that if this is a great risk to democracy, because if people are ashamed of their own language, then they're just you can forget your participatory democracy. That's what we're getting now. So at the moment, we have 20%, 30% of the electorate that turns out at the ballot. And those who do turn out are only doing it because of just a shared class-related interest, but certainly not because there's an active political participation in the discourse.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm shocked as an American, and I will tell you why. Because we here, especially in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia,
Mhm,
Boston, we have such a strong Neapolitan presence of, heritage Italian Americans who are from Naples. And I feel like Naples is huge. And I feel like Neapolitan culture in its history is such a big part of Italian American history
mhm,
in the United States, maybe to the point of overrepresentation
mhm,
here. And as you're telling this story about in the Constitution, okay, Neapolitan is not included. And then again,
mhm,
60 years later, it's still not included.
mhm,
And it just seems like, why would they leave such a gaping hole of a language that's spoken by so many people
mhm.
of a region that has given the world so much? And it's beyond an oversight. It's just wrong. It's racist,
Yeah.
um, and classist, and it's a shame. And I'm I know
So, yeah,
this is a very American perspective, and I own that, but
yeah.
I'm like,
No, you're right. And this is what's happening now when I go for a lecture and then people are just taken aback to say the least. But at the same time, there is a huge realization. They go, I remember the very first lecture, which was in Neapolitan at Glasgow University, and the kids, when I was explaining to them how the Elena Ferrante books are essentially just very much a similar product to The Birth of a Nation by W.H. Griffith. And then you show them and you give them the historical background, and then they go, well, I never thought of that. But as far as I'm concerned, then if you then acquire this history-based background, then everything makes sense. Because if you look at how Naples was a building block in the big castle of Western civilization. And there are others, even in the East, the Dalit community in India and Filipinos. I mean, there are some ethnicities and that were identified as the building blocks. And also, I think in terms, these guys are really fixated with geopolitics and
mhm,
they like to draw lines and to say, you're good, you're bad. This is how thick they are. And they're completely obtuse. They do that and they have no qualms. So as far as that concerned, Naples is where civilization ends. But at the same time, given that we have produced, as you were saying, so much culture, they need to tread those waters really carefully. So they need to keep us content and they need to fool us into thinking there were some unique species and the most beautiful city in the world, but at the same time, ripping us apart.
I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
You know, just because you were saying it in the States, you know, Neapolitan culture is so important. I think it's also important to realize that Neapolitans and Southern Italians were never allowed to be their own selves. Yeah.
Mhm.
So when they migrated to the States, they were hugely discriminated against,
Oh
and
yeah.
that also caused then discrimination amongst other minor ethnicities, you know, between the Italians and the African Americans,
Mhm.
because naturally you take it out on the next underdog, you know, that's what happened. And then again, history is really important because it would remind us of how we Southern Italians were perceived, you know, through their Dillingham report as a subspecies, you know, subhumans. And these things have an impact on how your culture is then perceived. And the introduction of the Columbus Day, that was not a pacification. That did not pacify anything. That just
Mhm.
created a situation where the U.S. was saying to the Southern Italians, your culture is welcome, but you need to assimilate it. You need to allow
Mhm.
yourself to be assimilated. So Columbus stands for that very much expansionism based on Western civilization and the progressive mercantile idea had nothing to do with our culture because we never joined in with the blindly, you know, just greed-based Renaissance. We were happily stuck in the Middle Ages trying to figure out possibly an alternative Renaissance. So I think I feel a lot for all the Neapolitans who are, victims in the States and Southern Italians, because they suffered the diaspora in a way that is completely tough, because there's a lot of internalized racism, and there's a lot of passivity that you feel absolutely powerless. You see all these stereotypes being thrown at you, but you know that the true essence of your culture not only is it not allowed, but is looked down on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really went to express your own Neapolitan culture, imagine Neapolitans trying to say, oh, could we please speak a little Neapolitan, just to discuss, the best and most prominent poets and philosophers. No, give us
Mm-hmm.
more pizza, please.
I like that a lot of your work takes historical context into account, because as you said earlier, it's very easy to brush past that, and for greater society to forget how important the history is to where we are in the present, and can set a path forward for the future. You've written literature in Neapolitan, and that is really powerful. And especially now that you've given so much more context, it sounds even more powerful to make this decision, to make this choice. But tell us a bit about what was that like, deciding to write
Yeah,
in Neapolitan, and tell us about what you've been writing about, of course,
sure.
and some of the reactions to that.
Yes, as I was saying, it was only in 1999 when I first discovered that there was something missing. But even after 1999, I went on right. I knew that there was something I wanted to express in terms of ideas. Well, I never thought I would be able to do it in Naples. So I just went on and even wrote a novel in Italian. And some even publishers were quite interested. And then at that point, though, I realized that really the core of the ideas I wanted to express was not there, and that it could have never been there, because it belonged to a place that was only inhabited by those words.
Mm.
And so even though I was in my late 20s, and I just said, okay. And at that point, my Neapolitan was really, really thin. It was really thin because I'd acquired other languages. So I had to go all the way back. I remember at that time, I was listening to this album by Paul McCartney, and I think the title was Flaming Pie. And in that album, he was quoting this phrase by John Lennon, who at one point he said, I go back so far, I'm in front of me. So I thought, as an intellectual, if you like, wannabe, I had to really find out about myself first before I tried to teach anything, anyone. And so I left everything. I just left all the things I'd written in Italian. I just went back to the ABCs, so I just bought as many books as I could, all the dictionaries, all the poetry. And, I think there's a Chinese saying that says, if you want to write poetry, just read everything you can and then read everything for 10 years and then see if you can come up with something. That's exactly what I did. So it took absolutely forever. But the idea was, for example, with the novel, the idea was to, as you grow up as a speaker in Nepal, you're told that Neapolitan is admitted here, admitted there. And folks will ask, could you write this? Could you do this in Neapolitan? I remember expressly, even university professor, no, you couldn't do that. And the idea was, it's cognitively limited. And again, I saw that as a form of segregation, because you can't, there's only so many ideas you can express. You are the plebeian who needs to sit back and wait for us to make all the decisions. And so for me, the novel was a way for me to fully empower the members of the lowest, if you like, strata of the Neapolitan population, the downtrodden, who've been told that they have no right, they're not supposed to have any say in anything. And then that was interesting when I wrote the novel. Then at that point, it wasn't just a matter of dismissing it, but it was a matter that I began to see that these folks were just kind of shying away from it. It's just so, the saying, you can hide, but you can't run. So I began to see that these people now, they were just moving away from me because they didn't want to see that. And to this day, they don't want to have that conversation at this, before I began my work, people just, I can forget it. And now they see it. And after we publish our conversation, they'll see even more. And they'll be running. because we're in a new phase where this is now and it's here to stay. And luckily there'll be a new generation, just some youngster somewhere who will be inspired, and they will go, wait a minute, they will not have it in school. They'll say, well, this dude in Scotland has written a novel in Neapolitan. I want to write one. I want to publish one. And so yeah, that was the idea behind the whole design.
You must be so proud to have completed that.
I think when you're working for the preservation of the language of your own community, this that helps you in so many respects. First of all, cast your ego to one side. Well, you kind of have to, because now you've really honored me by inviting me, but I cannot forget that for the past 20 odd years, nobody knew my work. Nobody wanted to even hear my work. And it was just an inadmissible conversation. And now things that have changed in the world of philology and languages. So I was actually talking about this with somebody just yesterday. I thought this preserving languages is also a religious experience, because it helps you make peace with your mortality, with your immortality, with your being present everywhere at the same time, with your giving you that will to participate, to contribute, and to relieve, to help the fellow members of your community. It's quite really touching, obviously, aspect. I am happy. I would say when I see, for example, even at the latest play, I saw the cousins I grew up with. They were part of the cast. So these are actually, now we're all middle-aged, and but I can see my cousin Maria and Patricia. But then we were kids, and it's more than pride. It makes sense. It makes sense, and I think that's all we want. I think it's quite interesting that that what we call the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, but all they pursued really was some sort of rational, and a harmonically rational symbiosis, we like, with everything, with creation. And that was the person next to you, but also with God, and it's quite interesting. I think one of the most eminent speakers on Neapolitan, Thomas Aquinas, his idea was you don't achieve, unity with God by simply just reciting prayers, but it's actually by using your rationality. And the idea of rationality and the idea of the soul were actually one back then. Now instead, this new age based the idea of the soul being something that you can all experience at yoga or Pilates. But just very recently, instead, the soul was based on your rational faculties, and the idea to cultivate every aspect of your of knowledge.
This is exciting because there is so much conversation nowadays about minoritized languages and language revitalization, and I feel you're ahead of the curve. So you're well versed in this, and you're also just in time for this, a lot of these conversations that seem to be happening all over the world and in
Yeah.
all different contexts. I, as an outsider, I love seeing the so much conversation that's happening around minoritized languages in Italy, and people who are remembering and standing up for their culture and their languages and their communities. So I think what you're doing is incredibly powerful. And the fact that you have something written and you have a play, you have two novels, you have the play, because written materials are very important right now. Like we really need those right now, and make sure that we have the record of these languages. But I'd love to know, because I don't think you mentioned, what were the books about and what is the play about?
So the first one is set your soul to it, but rational soul, in my view, and it was massively inspired by also the Bluest Eyes, and this idea, by Toni Morrison, which is quite a troubling thing, because I remember when I was at uni, I read that when the Bluest Eyes first came out, African Americans weren't really happy. The early reactions were we don't want to talk about this.
Right.
And then even now, when people don't want to know about my books, then I can just, adduce it to the same problem, which it is. People really don't want to talk about internalized racism, and same applies to Italian Americans.
And
Uh,
shame.
and shame, because because you need that extra push ego in the capitalist era we're living in. So without that ego boost, then people just can't cope. So, and facing internalized racism takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of mental health strain. To this day, it's just an absolute anguish, because those scars just don't go away. I mean, in terms of you were just talking about racial linguistics, and in terms of just discovering the impact, the mental health related impact of language oppression, we have hardly scratched the surface. We really don't know what this means. That's exactly one of the main themes that I describe it as. The idea of just language oppression, I related to the idea of rape as it was originally intended, as in the abduction, just removing a person from the place, and there's words which some sort of GPS facility, for the person. I use this word and I'm here, and this is the place occupying the universe, and I can figure out the world around me. If I then force you to speak another language, then your whole GPS system is all over the place. And in the early stages of Western civilization, the rape had nothing to do with the idea of the sexual violence per se, but it was the idea of, I'm taking these people, I'm taking them with me, or I'm removing them because I need that land. And that's what happens in the book itself. But it's also, I still speak Italian. I have no animadversion against the Italian language. My children speak Italian. I like the Italian language. But at the same time, I had to expose the evil that lies beneath the language oppression. But at the same time, I was making an effort. I was making the ultimate effort to empathize with the oppressor, so that they could hopefully realize. In the book, there is this lady who's now used to live in downtown Naples, but she's middle class, if not upper class, and at that point then she culturally migrates, but then eventually she decides to adopt a child from a poor area, a deprived area, and this child is the son of one of her former playmates. So naturally, this gives you a sense of how it's all internally arisen. The whole conflict is all there. It's all happening within our own territory, and therefore just this self-hate is instilled through colonization, and then we caused it. Then we caused the rest of the damage. So this woman eventually, what I wanted to expose was at the same time, even though she's benefiting from using this language, this more powerfully, socially powerful language, at the same time, when she goes home, she's snorting cocaine, and she sexually abuses the child that she has adopted.
No.
And in terms of some sort of sick code switching, she demands that the child speaks Neapolitan to her, and she calls her sick name, because it's important that we expose that there is in denial we were discussing before. And if you speak to any middle class person in Naples, they'll say, I'm good with this. I can say a few words now in Neapolitan, but I'm good with my just being in Italian. But then, as it happens, as soon as there is some sort of racial discrimination on the TV nationally, you can see them there again. They're just like shriveling, and they are just as mortified as our parents, as our, when they were told parla bene, or when they felt mortified because they were. So I think what I was trying to do in that book is, again, what I was trying to say, this damages us both, right? You might be successful, and but we know what's going on. We know that, I know that you are deeply unhappy, deeply embarrassed by this. So, just come out in the open. Let's rediscuss the whole dialectical approach to this in a way that maybe is not unsuppressive.
Yeah. So the play, where was it staged?
The play was staged. It was sold out. I'm still in disbelief about this because
Oh.
it was sold out with 3 weeks to spare, and it wasn't that it was all family members. And no, it was hardly that. It was just complete strangers who turned up. Some people that drove for an hour or so to come and see the play. So to this day, 3 months later, I'm still in disbelief. So it was staged at the Tron Theatre in Glasgow. And the play is based on Seedmaker, which is a play by the award-winning Scottish author Alan Spence. And the original, even the Scottish play, which is written both in English and Scots Glaswegian, it just provided me with the ideal situation where I could just reveal this cultural migration of this child who is drifting away from his dad after the loss of the mum and the man's wife. Then the dad just collapses into this vicious circle of booze and gambling, whereas the child is acquiring more education. But I like the usual narrative, if you like, the racist, the Ferrante narrative, whereby this kid is very much aware of what's going on, and he decides, as he's studying in school, he decides to, wait a minute, there's more to this. There's books that haven't really shown me, and the kid begins to rediscover a whole reading list
Mm.
that would have made things different, that would have made Renaissance for us, and possibly that probably allowed us to just save ourselves from the past 2 centuries of this inner colonization that was the unification of Italy.
Mhm.
And then therefore, so the boy, instead of just drifting away in the end, they found, again, they found this language-based common ground where they can just reconvene and find and really pacify one, just in a way that is healthy, both
Okay.
for them and their community.
Hmm. Give us the title of the play.
The title of the play is Master, which is Neapolitan for carpenter.
Okay.
The original play the original play's title is Sailmaker, and that was one of the interesting conversations I had with the author Alan Spence. I completely changed, obviously, the setting, but it was inevitable.
Yeah.
Okay, because where we grew up, you were either the men at the time was all the men who had the jobs out with the household. You were either a carpenter or a cobbler or something, or a plumber.
Okay.
Those were the professions that were.
I have two questions for you, and I was writing them down while you were talking. Number one,
Mhm.
completely sold out play. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What makes me ask this question is you have a completely sold out play, you're in Glasgow, and the play is in Neapolitan. That makes me wonder about the Neapolitan community in Scotland, number
Mhm.
one. Number two, are we taking this play on the road? When will it be opening in Naples?
The number one is it goes back to the really sad story of the internalized racism of Neapolitans. I was trying to cast Neapolitans here in Scotland who turned me down because they have no interest. Because now the idea now, what is happening now? There's this self-induced delusion, or also that the best way forward is to self-commodify.
Mhm.
So, if you say Ferrante and the Saviano and the Instagram phenomenon and touristification, this idea is, you just get as much as you can out of it, but don't be in it. And so we are
Interesting.
self-commodifying. So if you're really going to the true essence, the core of the culture, do you want to be it? Or do people just prefer to just act as it? Or to be seen as associated with it. But
Wow.
so being it, well, that's a completely different kettle of fish. Is it on the road, or will it be going on the road yet? So I'm in conversations. One thing I'm proud of is the fact that I see myself as the bigger. This makes me think of what I see as my idea of Christianity, the Christianity that was transmitted to me. Just if you're doing something if you think you're doing something that might be good for others, don't be ashamed. What I've done throughout the past 25 years is basically on a daily basis knocking on people's doors. Do you have a bowl of, instead of have a bowl of food, do you have a minute for the Neapolitan language? So at the minute, do you have any? I've sent out lots of emails. I've had just a couple of shows of interest, but it's tricky. We need to see whether then people are really, because this is what, if the whole thing came out, if you like, then we were talking about just massive changes, to the massive changes that would apply to the very nature of our country, for the better.
Yeah.
Which could simply be for the better, if you just simply, because the idea is to simply add Neapolitan to the minority languages, let's have it taught. But instead, the brutes or some of the brutes of Western civilization aren't really that open-minded, and they see that as a threat to their dominant roles, and so. But hopefully, this is very much a war of attrition. So hopefully. And again, if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, which I'm sure I'm not expecting the whole problem to be resolved in my lifetime. I'm still hoping that somebody else, some youngster will come in and take over.
I hope you realize I'm going to put out a casting call for this play.
Yeah.
We're gonna get this play cast and we're gonna get it shown in Naples. I'm gonna tell everybody I know. Just a side note for our listeners, you've mentioned Ferrante a few times and you've connected it to Birth of a Nation, which we know is horrific. But just really quickly, if there are any examples that you want to share about how, because I know people have been reading Ferrante and they've been, there was the limited series and she's held in high regard in literary circles. And I think people who have maybe read her books, I know people have suggested I read her books. I have not. But what is the conflict?
I think, first of all, we shouldn't forget that it was only 400 years ago when we were burning people at the stake because they believed that the earth was in the center of the universe. So again, that goes back to the idea of history. And also that academia has never been hardly ever been an independent entity, within the superstructure. At the same time, I think the most disappointing thing for me is that I see my work also as in a way, anti-patriarchy work. Yeah, there was seminal work by Gerda Lerner, The Creation of Patriarchy, was really revealing, because in her seminal work, Gerda Lerner suggests that patriarchy can only function really with the complicity of women and middle-class women who gain advantages, social class advantages from their supporting the oppressive nature of patriarchy. And when I hear all these literary circles where women are supportive of reference, that makes perfect sense to me. And let's not forget that most white women back in the early 20th century were very much supportive of W.H. Griffith's work. And the idea was that even though these people were fellow human beings, they were just not equally human. I think it's the time delay is really essential here, because if you think about the publication of Heart of Darkness, and then which, when it was first published, it was fully accepted. But then 50 years later, you have the publication, 60 years later, you have Chinua Achebe's All Things Fall Apart. And suddenly the liberals, including women, they start saying, well, that's actually racist. So I think liberalism needs this time delay where it kind of condones itself. So in 50 years' time, I am pretty sure that all the progressives would get there and say, oh, Elena Ferrante, after all, Elena Ferrante is racist. But they need that time to fully weaponize the racist nature of this work, because, and I think that's just part of how the Western civilization operates. They are the thrashers and the healers. So at this moment in time, capitalism is going through a phase where it's running out of territories, it's running out of people to oppress and to exploit. So there's the next thing is the sale of people's identities and cultures and the commodification of anything that moves.
Okay. So in these themes that we're seeing in her work, what are we specifically calling out that is racist? I just want listeners to understand who may have read her work, just to understand what's problematic.
The problem is that, first of all, is the idea that I could only watch, it was so painful, I could only watch a few clips from the first episode, the idea that plebeians are inherently violent, that there is this idea that they are sexual predators.
Okay.
That's a characterization. And then these children who can only achieve a more civilized status as long as they embrace the language of the master. And this idea that there is no alternative. I think it kind of limits your aspirations in a way that then the speaker on Neapolitan can only see themselves as a potential self, someone who can commodify themselves. Let's not forget that another aspect of Western civilization is this idea. Again, this goes back to the saying, the Neapolitan saying that I was going to mention in the end, but big spoiler here, they thrash and they heal. Yeah, so this idea that Western civilization, they can destroy, raid city to the ground, and then they call themselves liberators because they are rebuilding it. Yeah, I think that's the extreme. The characterization is almost banal in the way it just emulates some other racist works such as Heart of Darkness or W.H. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. And it's really interesting that so many women fell for it. But then again, let's not forget that the average Western person is not entirely bias-free. Yeah, it's just to say the least. I used one of the epigraphs in the play is this quote from one of Elena Ferrante's articles where she says, well, what she does in her book, she never mentions a word of Neapolitan, maybe a couple, but she's always characterizing the aggressive and the evil characters by saying in dialect. And her explanation is that as a middle-class person who lived, probably not even as a working-class person with middle-class aspirations, she created, or she just joined the ivory tower offered by the Italian language, whilst at the same time characterizing the rest of the people who just stayed there as those savages who didn't quite make it. And so she says, yeah, so I don't use Neapolitan in it. She says, because when I grew up, I had plenty of reasons to believe, to see Neapolitan as the language of aggression. That was just obviously dictated by a choice. That is an atavistic stance. And again, that proves that race theory has never left the discourse. I would say after the novels and the play, I contacted a lot of reporters from The Guardian, but they're not willing to look at the other side of the story. So they have Ferrante, and they say, so she doesn't speak a word of Italian or Neapolitan. And, I've published these things. I've got the show. I've invited a couple of reporters who were in London to the play. I said, oh, yeah, I've loved that. But then, again, so there's a cowardice in that they will only look at the bigotry of it all, and they will just dismiss the rest because it's kind of convenient.
There's so much to say. We need to revisit this somehow. I have ideas in my head, but we'll talk about this. I just want to give you a chance for our listeners to have all the information in one place. Let us know the name of your books. Let us know the name of your play. And if there's anything else that you want people to check out or to see, or any of your works that you want people to check out, pay attention to, please let us know where we can find them.
Sure. Well, my website is canzanella.net. And the titles of my books the English ones are Set Your Soul to It and You Don't Say. And the title of the latest play is Master Ash, which is Neapolitan for carpenter. I think it would be interesting for folks also to know that there's really a misleading conversation about Neapolitan being a language recognized by UNESCO. It's complete nonsense. UNESCO recognizes Neapolitan as a linguistic cluster, as a regional entity, linguistic entity, if you like. And again, I think this is aimed at pulling people into just thinking that somebody's looking after a Neapolitan. Nobody is looking after the Neapolitan language. Nobody, no official body. And importantly, there's also a committee, which is naturally now that they're scrambling, they're trying to respond to the change in perception of the language. There is a scientific committee in the region of Naples, which is Campania, and is supposedly preserving the Neapolitan language. But the name of the committee is Comitato Scientifico for il something Patrimonio Linguistico Napolitano. Yeah, so that is essentially the same idea behind UNESCO's definition. So this body is saying, okay, there is all sorts of languages, it's spoken all around the area of Naples, but they don't recognize, crucially, Neapolitan as a linguistic entity with cultural representation. So people just really stop talking nonsense about some sort of preservation of the language that's taking place somewhere. There's nothing. So it's really up to youngsters to get real and do signs that are not just real on social media, but they're actually visible and tangible for people using Neapolitan on a daily basis, which is really what should be our main concern.
Yeah. I will add links to your website and links
Okay.
to your information in the show notes for this episode and any other resources in the show notes for this episode so that people who are listening will be able to click and connect with you or connect with Neapolitan language resources right away.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is an optimistic question, but what do you hope for in maybe your best case, your wildest dreams? What do you hope for in the immediate to near future of Neapolitan language respect and acquisition amongst learners, amongst Neapolitan people? What are you the most hopeful to see?
I would really love for young people to emancipate themselves and for them to be able to just to drive it wherever they want, as long as there isn't a party that's taken over it. There's no being commodified. There's no being used to the advantage of the few. So I would love for young people to realize that it's really that the language is the protein of a community, of communities, for people to just move away from this idea that anything is up for sale. Your identity is not for sale. And it's really up to you to look after it.
Those are wise parting words. And I would love to see that as well. I would really love to see that as well. And I think that the community can get there. I think it can happen. Massimiliano Canzanella.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
thank you.
for this conversation.
Thank
As I
you.
said, we have so much more to discuss.
I know.
But this is opening the door to what's next. So I really, really appreciate your time and this conversation. I like to end each episode on the same question. And that is, do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Neapolitan to share and to teach us?
Well, absolutely. It's possibly one of the most formative sayings, and it's in Neapolitan. It goes "Shakkana" and "Merikana." So literally, it would be they thrash and they heal. And I think it's just one of the most amazing teachings I've ever received. So in terms of just watch out, just make sure you understand the difference between those who are battering you and those who call themselves the first aiders. So yeah, it's also quite highly sophisticated in terms of saying there is we're not all the same. In the capitalism, we're not all the same. So sadly, the way it works at the moment, there's oppressors and oppressed. So just make sure you're aware of the side of the barricade you're on and act accordingly.
Can I try it?
Absolutely. Shakana Americana.
Shakana Americana.
Perfect. Perfect. Absolutely perfect.
All
Wonderful.
right. I'm on my way. I'm on my way. Thank you so much again
No,
for
thank
this
you.
conversation. And before I let you go, quick question. Let's say you've been talking to someone for quite a while
Mhm.
about Neapolitan, and now you're about to go your separate ways. What is the best way in Napolitano, in Neapolitan language, to say goodbye?
Oh, Shavarim. Shavarim.
Shabarim?
Shavarim. Yeah,
Shabarim?
perfect. Shavarim. I'll see you. Yeah.
Oh, Shabarim,
Shavarim.
Massimiliano.
Yeah, Shavarim.
Thank you so much, and I'll
Oh,
be
thank you.
talking to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like yourselves.